He was a bit of a question mark,
Okay.
which was difficult for us because we didn't ever really feel like we got the help that he needed. By the end, that hope really, really diminished. And my dad always used to say, sometimes it's the hope that kills you. He would say that medicating, for example, with cocaine would be the only time where he felt like himself again. So I'm stuck in fight or flight. I'm on edge.
Okay.
And that is something I don't think people register as a symptom of grief.
Hello, my name's Charlie, the founder of Lived Insights, and welcome to the Lived Insights podcast. We're going to be having conversations with many different people on many different topics to get their insights, their experiences, their knowledge, their wisdom to help other people. Please tell friends, tell family, tell colleagues, and without further ado, let's crack on with this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Lived Insights podcast. Today's guest is Ruby. Hi Ruby.
Hi.
And the main topic we're going to discuss today, although I feel we'll probably venture into other topics, is bereavement. So a difficult subject, difficult topic to talk about, and particularly in this case, as Ruby will explain. So Ruby, would you mind just telling us what actually happened and when this happened?
Yes. So, very basically, my brother, who was younger than me, he was 24 years old, he took his own life last January the 17th. And yeah, it's just a journey that I've been on for just over a year now, dealing with sudden bereavement, a very unexpected bereavement by suicide, and something that is becoming increasingly common in young males. Yeah,
and I think most people are aware that particularly male suicide, the rates are very high and have been for decades, unfortunately, and there's seemingly no sign that that's coming down. If anything, it's increasing.
Yes. It's the leading rate of death in young males.
Yeah.
Which is, when you think about it, is just shocking.
And presumably you weren't expecting this. It came out of the blue. It was a shock. Or
my brother had been rather mentally unwell for 6 or 7 or 8 years.
Okay.
He struggled with his mental health with regards to psychosis, bipolar. Mm-hmm. He was a bit of a question mark, which was difficult for us because we didn't ever really feel like we got the help that he needed. But I just think it's so hard. Mental health is such a broad topic, and there's so much we still don't know. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we ever will. I know that there's definitely a lot of research and everything going into it, but something as unpredictable as psychosis or bipolar, he was also labelled schizophrenic, internalized OCD. The label flickered.
So presumably he had seen doctors, he'd gone down the help support route for many years.
Yeah.
And various labels were given, but were there signs that there were improvements?
There was, so it was a bit of a roller coaster, and we were on that roller coaster with him. Mm-hmm. And the poor boy, sometimes I feel a bit guilty sitting and telling his story.
That's natural.
Yeah, when really it should be him sitting here telling it. But if he can't do it, then I can. But we were on that roller coaster with him, and that must have been so difficult for him to not have an understanding of where he was going to be one day to the next.
Okay.
And we got great help under 18 for him from CAMS, who were incredible. As soon as he switched to 18, it's like that. It was that sort of filtering process of where does he go next? How do we get him help? And obviously was then put towards the adult mental health services. And it was just, I don't think anyone could really understand what was going on. It was a bit of a guessing game, and the mind is such a complex place, and it's so individual that putting a label on somebody that's saying, oh, you're bipolar, you're in this category, we're going to give you this medication. And maybe that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that made him worse.
Mm-hmm.
So then there was the side effects of the drugs, which would equally potentially cause more discomfort to him.
And I think it's natural. You want answers, you want explanations.
Yeah.
And if people offer medication, you take it because that could help.
Yeah.
Perhaps without knowing the side effects or the fact that a lot of medication doesn't work. And as you say, it's so complex.
Yeah.
Mental health, and what will work for one person won't
Exactly.
work for
It's
someone
not
else.
one size
Multiple
fits
different
all.
factors. So I can imagine over a long period of time for him, as well as the family and yourself, trying to find the answers, trying to find understanding.
Yeah.
And were there periods where you felt that you were getting the answers?
Yeah, there was periods of hope when
Yeah.
we felt like he was getting better. And it was positive, but this roller coaster went up and down so many times that by the end, that hope really, really diminished. And my dad always used to say, he would say, sometimes it's the hope that kills you, because you're hoping so much that he's going to get better, that there's going to be a change. And, he'd get better for a couple of weeks, but then you'd start to see that him getting better because he was slipping out of depression would then slowly become a manic phase. And that little stage in between was where he was a little bit more level. So he'd be coming out of that depression, and then he'd slowly becoming more manic.
Yep.
And then into this sort of mania of
There was
delusions
never
of
a
grandeur.
period of sustained
No, and if there was, it would maybe be like maximum a week,
right,
2 weeks,
okay.
and we were like, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe he's gotten better, and then something would tip
And
the
presumably
scales.
he felt that way as well.
Totally, and it was something would tip the scales, and he'd be in a more of a manic phase or more in a depressed phase.
Okay.
And often when he thought he was well, was when we saw alarm signals of that.
Yeah.
Oh, he's unwell, and that would often be when he was delusional and manic, and he was having a great time. But
And so although he was given a diagnosis or different diagnoses, medication, labels, had different kinds of support, was he ever sectioned?
Yeah.
Was he ever put into a place where, I guess it's another level to that?
yes, he was sectioned 3 or 4 times.
Okay. I think there's a lot of judgment, assumptions, stereotypes, and I think probably to most people, if you use the word someone gets sectioned, it's very negative, and it's
They picture
a
like
crazy
one flew over
person.
the cuckoo's nest, kind of that kind of hospital.
And the reality is, many people, well, for most people, it's completely in their interest. It's absolutely necessary for them, their own protection, to get the right help, to be on that path of being okay. I mean, I've recently heard about Heston Blumenthal's, the cook, the chef, his story and how he was sectioned, and his wife
didn't know that.
did it. Yeah, and he talks about it now, saying that's kind of saved his life. That he was there for a couple of months, and that was what was necessary.
Yes.
It's
like if you had a physical illness, you'd be in intensive care. It's an intensive care for the mind.
Yeah, and I think although over the last decade particularly, there's been a lot more awareness, there is still a huge amount of people who don't understand, and assumptions, and there's still stigma that exists, etc. So he was sectioned, therefore he was presumably in the right place for that period, but then he was released and
yes, and then tended to. It's difficult with the sectioning because as it was great for him to be in there, to have that one-on-one support, it wasn't clear to me that it was a particularly nurturing environment. It was very, what you can imagine, white walls, very hospital. They weren't allowed out unless it was for a cigarette, which confused me also, as somebody that works in health and wellness. But when he then came out, he was often released suddenly. So they'd be like, oh, you can come out in a month or in a week, for example. And then they turn around and go, oh, no, you can leave this afternoon. We've had a review and you can leave this afternoon.
Right.
So from a nervous system point of view, my brother would be like, oh, what's going on? And often to somebody that struggles mentally, that sudden shock can cause high levels of anxiety and you know, he'd come out and potentially, not the word relapse, but he'd spiral downwards again and become worse. So especially with something like psychosis, bipolar, sometimes it's hard to tell how well the person's doing, because Johnny got very good at not hiding his symptoms, but calling a bluff.
Okay,
you know,
masking it.
Yeah, masking it. Or he had these thoughts going on in his head, delusional thoughts perhaps, or depressive thoughts, and he'd just act fine on the surface, and then would go and do something quite peculiar. Which would be like an alarm flag to people. And often what he would maybe think that wasn't peculiar to us was quite strange.
Okay. And during that period, were there other suicide attempts?
Yes, there had been one prior in the November. So he took his life in January. And in the November prior, I was abroad. I lived abroad for 10 years. And I came back after he took his own life. It was unclear to us whether or not it was an attempt at taking his own life, or whether he had potentially just overdosed on his prescription pills.
Okay.
So he took whatever he could out of the cupboard of his prescriptions, and
this was the first attempt.
This was the first attempt, and had to get taken into hospital. Right. My parents conveyed it to me as he just took too many, and it didn't really resonate me that. And I don't know whether it's subconsciously I was trying to protect myself, and I was like, oh no, this isn't a suicide attempt.
Play it down.
Maybe I was trying to protect myself. I'm not sure. So I was speaking to them, and I was in Costa Rica at the time, and I said, you know, should I come back? And they were like, no, there's nothing you can do. It's absolutely fine. There's no need to come back. Like, he's just in hospital, and we'll get him sorted. And I was like, okay, fine. And then he proceeded to then take his life in January.
Was that a similar method?
No, he stepped out in front of a bus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing I just want to pick up on in terms of depression, the help, the support. So you mentioned that for many years he was going through different channels. Some seemed helpful, others perhaps not. Different environments, trying to work out what the cure is, essentially. And that involved him, your parents, yourself, and then professional bodies, NHS, all lots and lots of people. And the way you described it, it was nothing ever worked for a sustained period of time. It was very much a roller coaster, up and down.
Totally.
And that must have, obviously for him, been extremely difficult to deal with. But for you, for your family, for people who cared about him, that must have taken its toll.
Johnny was a force of nature. You know, he was unpredictable. He would be up, he'd be down, he'd be all over the place. And to be on that roller coaster as a family, I know specifically for my mum, particularly for my mum even, she was living with him full time. And that was... And
in terms of your mental health, her mental health, your dad, everybody, there must have been an effect on them.
Definitely affected my mum's mental health. But I think as a mother...
Were they getting the support?
She eventually, after maybe about 5 or 6 years, reached out to a charity called Hetty's, who help support carers of people who have... It's actually for drug and substance abuse, which was something that Johnny's illness led him down to deal with his own... Because he was being medicated by the doctors, but he was also self-medicating. And he would say that medicating, for example, with cocaine would be the only time where he felt like himself again. Because he just felt sharp and back to normal, not depressed ever. And my mum eventually reached out to them, and they were really great at supporting her. But I think from what I can tell as a parent, for her, you go into this, like, it doesn't matter about me, it's just about them. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make this situation better kind of role, and can potentially end up neglecting their own emotions and their own needs.
It's an instinctive
Yeah.
thing to do, but there'll always be a cost to that.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say, but everybody's got to look after themselves first and foremost before they can then help other people.
You can't pour from an empty cup. I really like that expression, because you just have to think, okay, now I need to take my time for me and able to give back to others.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just giving, and you'll wear yourself thin.
Okay, so did you, as a family, notice that? As in, did you go and get help? Did you look after yourself, or did you literally just, we're only going to deal with Johnny, and that became an issue because that would have had consequences?
We were neglecting ourselves as a family. I know that Johnny was the priority, but because he demanded all that attention, because he was a lot of the time unpredictable, so we had to keep an eye on him. And our emotions went with his emotions. So really, our emotions with regards to anything else was pretty obsolete, because whatever else was going on in life, it didn't really matter, because he was unwell.
Sure.
So it kind of put everything on hold and to the side. And I realise now, it's really bizarre, but because he was ill for such a long time, and I do feel a bit guilty for saying it, but because he was ill for such a long time and we were so attached to this, I do feel like part of the reason he took his own life was to free himself, but to also to free us, because he knew that he wasn't going to get any better. And he'd said to me in the past that he felt like a burden.
Okay.
And I do feel it was interesting, that questionnaire you did, that I answered on the Lived Insights website. And one of the questions said, what emotions did you feel after the person leaves?
And you mentioned relief.
And it was like, I've had so much space appear in my life to focus on myself. Partly that I didn't even know what to do with, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, he's not here, what do we all do? It'd been 7 years of concentrating on him. Yes, I was living abroad, but part of the reason I was living abroad was because I found it too difficult to face that situation day to day. And my parents definitely encouraged that for me to not be around, and said, go live your life, do your thing, this is our responsibility. So that relief is something that comes hand in hand with guilt.
And I mean, I saw that on the questionnaire, and I think this is one of the things about Lived Insights and people sharing their experiences and their insights and topics like this to an outsider who's perhaps not experienced it. Someone saying or hearing that an emotion they found regarding someone's death is relief would be strange. However, it's a common, it depends on lots of circumstances. Obviously, everyone is different, but whether it's an elderly person going through a long-term illness, whether it's dementia. I mean, at some point, my dad, who's in a dementia care home, when he passes away, I guarantee that one emotion will be relief. And in your situation with Johnny, then completely understandable. So if we go to the actual bereavement side, I mean, we could talk for a lot longer about mental health, and we'll perhaps touch on it again, and what he went through. But you said you were living abroad at the time. And you heard the news from your parents?
Yes, my parents called me,
And what were your initial reactions? Shock? What?
It's really weird, because I was in the Alps. I was on a job in the French Alps, and I hadn't had service that evening, and I was out with some friends. It was actually the first time. I've been sober for nearly 2 years now, and it's the first time I decided to go out into an environment where it was like a party environment with some friends, and I decided that I felt strong enough to be able to go out and not have a drink. And that to actually enjoy it, because at first I was just like, oh gosh, this is boring, everyone's drunk. So I went out, and I didn't have any phone service, and we went to then a restaurant afterwards to get some food. And I remember my mum, a message came up on my friend Sarah's phone saying, "Hi Sarah, it's Ruby's mum. Can you get her to give me a call on this number?" And just, I don't know why or how, but immediately I knew.
Okay. Something, intuition.
Yeah. I went into straight panic. I grabbed her phone. I went straight outside and I called my mum and my dad, who aren't together but were together at the time.
Okay.
And the first thing when they told me, I just went into complete panic attack. I just couldn't breathe. I was screaming and crying. And then I went into denial and I just kept accusing them of lying. And I was like, "No, you're lying, you're lying. I don't believe you." And it was difficult because I wasn't at home with my family, and I had to make it back from, I was still very much in denial, and in this hysterical state. And the girl I was staying with at the time, bless her, she walked me home, ran me a bath, and I don't think I slept until I somehow managed to book a flight back home on my laptop, which, because I'd been living in Spain, was in Spanish. So I somehow navigated EasyJet Spanish and booked myself a flight home. I have no idea how I managed it. Looking back, I'm like, how on earth I managed it? I don't know. Managed to message the transfer company, get myself a transfer back to the airport the next morning. I think I stayed on the phone to my dad that night to try and sleep, and he said, "Oh, we'll just stay on the phone. We don't need to talk." And I got to the airport, and what I found really shocking and quite bizarre is that I was in the airport about waiting for the flight on the seats. It's quite a quiet airport, and I was clearly having a panic attack. Like, I couldn't breathe. I was crying. And it kept sort of coming and going in waves. I was trying to stay calm. And like, nobody did anything.
Right.
And everyone just kind of sat there like...
Yeah.
And if that was me in that situation, I don't know if it's just the type of person I am, but I'd go over to the person and say, "Are you okay?
Yeah.
Do you need something?" And nobody did, which was really bizarre. So somebody went and flagged an attendant.
Okay.
And then an attendant came over to me and said, "Would you like to step outside?" So they took me outside and sat me down, and she said, if you don't calm down, we can't let you get on the flight, because if you're hyperventilating in the air, it could be dangerous.
Okay.
And that's it. I just went into tunnel vision. I was like, well, I have to calm down. I have to get home.
Yeah.
And eventually managed to board the flight, and these poor people behind me just listened to me cry for the whole 2.5 hours on the way home. And it was weird. The flight, because I was traveling from France I'm quite a spiritual person, and I'm not a believer in coincidence. I believe a lot of things happen for a reason. And as I was flying home, I was traveling from France back to England, so I was going back in time, in effect, because England's behind.
Yeah.
And the sun was setting. So for the whole 2.5 hours, because I was traveling back in time, the sun was still setting.
Okay.
So I had a sunset, which got brighter and brighter and brighter until I landed. And I just fixated on the sunset the whole time. And in my eyes, you can call it what you want, but in my eyes, it wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah.
And and then I landed, and my dad picked me up from the airport.
You talked about hearing the news. There's no good way of hearing news like that.
Yeah.
But on the phone in another country, but you then went into this, I guess, mix of shock, panic attacks, but then also able to book flights, control it, get there, do it. Yeah. And you don't know how, but you did it. And I think when I hear about stories that are relatable to this, that is what we do as humans. We somehow deal with the situation. Yeah. You don't know quite how, but you deal with it.
Yeah, it's the adrenaline.
Yeah, and you go into that, I guess, survival mode of what you have to do to get through it. So you were then obviously reunited with your parents, presumably, and family, and then there must have been a few days of absolute
bizarreness.
Yeah, what? Because you've got an element of this is terrible, tragic things just happened, and you're probably asking all these questions and what could have been done and why and how, but then you've got the practicalities of dealing with somebody's death. So how did you
paperwork and all that?
Yeah,
I'm lucky in that I have had a lot of grieving space in terms of my parents handled all the paperwork and all that. So I understand that it must be much harder for, especially my mum, who went through all the legal side of the paperwork. He had his own flat, so that she got really sort of like non-empathetic messages saying like end of tenancy, so it was like stuff like that, which wasn't helpful. Like it literally said end of tenancy due to death, and to a parent who's been bereaved, like it's not that compassionate. But that's another topic.
Well, I think there are some genuine things to consider here, in that something like that's happened. You've got to deal with the practicalities, and a lot of those, the person or the situation, there's literally no empathy, nothing. And if you were to say, my son's just died or something like that, you're trying to deal with stuff. You don't want to go into that emotional situation. But if you don't explain or say something, then you're just met with this completely kind of just non-sensitive kind of whatever it might be. And I mean, it's very different. But something I remember when I got diagnosed with cancer, we were due to go on holiday a couple of days later, and we couldn't go, had to cancel it. And I was trying to deal with the insurance company, and it was absolute nightmare. And
I can't even imagine.
I literally just and then I screamed at them on the phone, basically saying, I'm going to die from cancer, and you're not letting. We've got to cancel this. Why? Because there's all this paperwork or all this stuff that I can't remember the full detail, but just I got so upset by that. But that's nothing compared to, if you're dealing with, someone who's just
you
died.
say it's nothing. I don't believe there's any hierarchy in the trauma that we experience. What you felt may have been just as deep as what my mum felt. I don't think there's any hierarchy in it, and I think it's difficult, no matter what you're dealing with, to have to verbalize it to somebody when you don't feel ready. I found for me, verbalizing it created it in reality. If I didn't verbalize it, it's like it wasn't happening. So the more I had to say it, the more I had to accept it, because I was accepting it for the person I was speaking to, and then also for myself. And it's that the business world, the logistical side of stuff, there isn't space for, what if this person's dealing with something really heavy right now? And on one hand, like it was hard, but also having something to focus on post bereavement gave you some sort of channel, energy channel to focus on something, to maybe keep you a little bit distracted for a while, so you don't quite feel the whole depth of it. So I ended up really going into depth with planning Johnny's funeral. And I took it upon myself to write the, I can't remember what it's called now, the pages that you have at someone's funeral. I'm trying. I can't think.
I was going to say testimonials, but it's not testimonial. It's
memoir. Yes, thank you. Yes. So I took it upon myself to write the memoir, which is not something, and design it all. And make sure it had all the right pictures.
But that gave you a focus, distraction,
completely
productive, and helpful.
Also helpful, and also helpful in that it did help me with the grieving process also. And I also put together a video montage of videos of Johnny and family, which, going through all old photos and videos straight after somebody's died is not an easy task.
No.
But somehow I managed to get through it and almost became immune to it.
Okay.
And now if I went back to watch it, I'd be a mess.
Yeah.
It would get me going. But I'd managed to watch this video on repeat and edit it, put music to it, find bits funny, find bits sad. And
But I guess that's another example of you do what you have to do
yeah,
at the time.
Completely.
So that helped you those first few days.
Yeah.
And your parents were, you said about the paperwork, the admin, all that side of it. So I guess in a similar way that kind of distracted them.
Yes, absolutely.
So was there must have been emotion as well. I hope you're finding this episode interesting, informative and beneficial. And if so, please like, comment, subscribe, follow, and keep watching and listening to future episodes. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues. Also, if you can, go to the livedinsights.com website and fill in an online questionnaire. You'll be helping so many other people understand more about these different topics and issues. So remember, tune in to Lived Insights, the conversation, and the website. Thank you.
Yeah, so that was more like a month down the line. So Johnny died in January the 17th, and we had the funeral on February the 13th.
Okay.
So it was almost a month down the line. The first initial few days after Johnny passed was very much like a weird, long Christmas day, but a negative one.
Right.
In that everybody we knew came over. They bought food, they bought flowers, they bought biscuits.
Okay.
And a lot of people didn't leave. I was over at my dad's and with I've got two other younger brothers who are 16, 17 and 14. And it was like everybody showed up for themselves in a way, the best way that they knew how. So a lot of my friends came back from London and they would stay for a sleepover. It's like we were 12 again. I'm like 28 years old and having sleepovers with my best friends. And people just didn't leave my side. And I just thought that was really... And actually, me, my dad and my stepmom and my younger brothers always say, like, as hard as it was losing Johnny, the amount of love that filled that house after Johnny passed was just, like, mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And
that sounds like you had a lot of really good help and support.
Yeah.
And practical support.
Yeah.
Which I think is really important because I'll come on to this to see whether that continued. But with friends, family, etc., when I think most people, nearly all people, they want to help, but they're not sure how best to help.
Yeah.
And particularly those first few days, it's so important and can make such a big difference. But just, I mean, you talked about physically people coming to you and bringing you stuff and being there and presumably giving you hugs and all that kind of thing, and that positive energy.
Yeah.
Did you encounter stuff that perhaps you didn't appreciate or wasn't so good, or you would like to get across to people to say, look, there's things you can do or better ways of helping?
Yes, I think avoiding the subject completely is the worst thing you can do, because it's like a big elephant in the room, and it's because they feel uncomfortable that you now feel uncomfortable on top of your grief.
Yeah.
And you then feel made to feel uncomfortable with your grief. And I think the worst thing you can do is pretend like nothing's happened, because it's a big deal. And for somebody you just don't feel seen or understood when somebody does that. But I do also understand that is people's way of dealing with things. That if that happened to them, that also might be the way that they dealt with it as well. Yeah.
And I can imagine a lot of people didn't know what to say, so it's easier to say nothing.
Yeah.
Or they'll just say the generic things like, oh,
it'll get better with time.
Yeah. And often those, although well-meaning,
aren't helpful.
Yeah.
A lot of people would say, like, and I appreciate it, I do, but a lot of people would say, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know.
Yeah. And
I'm like, do you think I'm in the right state of mind to even know what I need right now?
And I saw that on your questionnaire about people saying, just let us know if there's anything we can do, what help you need. And you're not in that space to think about that. But also,
not in any space,
but also most people feel uncomfortable asking for help in that situation. Yes. I mean, I had that, again, different topic, but some similarities with the cancer. People saying, oh, let us know what we can do. And some of the practical things with cancer is things like taking you to hospital appointments, because usually parking's an absolute nightmare and stuff. So practical things like I'll give you a lift to the hospital, or get you some food in, or some practical things. But you don't want to ask people that. Most people don't.
No.
But if someone said, rather than let me know if there's anything, then can I offer you a lift?
Yeah.
Or is there something you need picking up? Or do you want me to go and do the shopping for you?
Yeah. Even just saying, like, being really direct and saying, when's your next appointment? Okay, I'll take you.
Yeah. So not offering help just out there because nothing will happen. Yeah. Actually saying, this is the plan. And even with a lot of my friends, it was funny with my friends, they're all from school and from very young ages. And they all showed up for themselves in different ways. And I was so appreciative of them. So I had Lauren, for example, who just cooked a big Polonaise and brought it round. And then she would organise and make sure that all my other friends were going to be there, and someone was always with me on one night. And then I had Lissy, one of my best friends. She was amazing at just sitting with me and holding space. She didn't need to say anything. She was so comfortable with my heavy emotions that I could just sit and bawl my eyes out with her, and she didn't even need to say anything. Yeah. Ellie was great. She was there all the time, just making cups of tea, being a happy self, bringing biscuits round and keeping that sort of like cozy home feeling going. And everybody really stepped up in a way that they knew they best could. And I think that's the best thing for anyone dealing with bereavement, grief, is just people doing what they know how, like giving the best way they know how to give. And I do think it's such a love language, being able to just show up for yourself in the way that you know how. If you're good at cooking, if you're good at organising, if you're good at making cups of tea, if you're good at just do that. I think I'm generalising here, but it was mentioned in the first podcast we did, and there's a lady, Carolyn, whose son was murdered, and she talked about her partner being fantastic because he was just there. He didn't try to fix anything, didn't try to come up with the answers and solution. And I think typically, I've got to put this point across, generalising, men are looking to solve a problem. They're looking to come up with a solution, an answer. And in these situations, there very rarely is something. It's being there, just sitting with you, just listening. And women typically are much, much better at this. And I think, those situations, like what we're talking about, for men, it's just try not to go into that fixing mode. Just
let it be.
Yes, just be there. And that's probably the best support in those circumstances.
I've had this conversation with my partner, who I'm very lucky to have met. It's been one of the blessings that I've had from my brother passing, is that I've moved back to the UK and I've met him. And, he's seen me hysterical, because there'll be bouts of grief that come later down the line, and it's just as bad as when it originally happened. And sometimes he'll say, okay, what can I do? I don't know how to solve this situation. And now he doesn't say that because he understands. But I just said, just be here. Just give me a hug. You don't need to say anything. Just listen. And really just listening is far more powerful than people give credit for. No, it makes total sense. And, I have to be aware of that as a typical male looking to solve the problems and come up with the answers. It's not just a male trait. I'm very much the same. If I see somebody hurting or in pain or suffering, I try and do something to help. And, sometimes, like you said, there isn't anything you can do. Just got to be there for them.
Okay. One of the questions on the questionnaire talked about, have you been affected financially or the family? And I put this in some of the different topics. And in cancer, I think it's, again, everyone's situation is different, but a lot of people don't realise that it can be hugely costly, even though you're getting treatment on the NHS or whatever, hugely costly, whether it's to do with work and income or the costs of going to the hospitals or all these other things. And it was mentioned in the bereavement questionnaire, and you talked about, there was a financial effect. Do you want to just explain a bit more about that?
Totally. On a practical level, I'm self-employed. So there was no like sick leave or anything like that for me. It was just
if you don't work,
I don't get paid. And I was on a contract out in the Alps, which I was due to be there for 2 months. Paid me a nice lump sum of money, and it was part of my plan. And then I was moving on to another contract. That all went. I got like £100 from the contract because I was there, I think, for a day.
Right.
And had to fly home. And then there goes my plan for the next 6 months. I felt incapable of working.
Sure.
And I think it was June, July, I started working again. So I went, 6 months unemployed. I'm in a very fortunate position where I had a bedroom at my mum's, which actually was my brother's bedroom. So that was difficult. I had to move back into my brother's room. Had it, moved it around a little bit, tried to clear the energy a bit. But definitely people don't, it's hard for my dad as well. People don't comprehend that when you're self-employed, if you don't work, you don't get paid. And I didn't think at the time, I'm going to sign on. Like, that just didn't even cross my mind. You're not thinking straight. Didn't come to me at all. So if I didn't have my parents home and something to fall back on like that, then like, I don't know what I would have done. And for people that don't have that, it can prevent the grieving process for one, but just make the whole thing so much more stressful for you.
No, I completely understand. And again, I'm in a fortunate position where, I could continue my business to an extent, but not as much. And I mean, I calculated with my cancer treatment, it cost me over £10,000 in terms of lost money and expenses and costs. And people might say, well, you got, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of treatment on the, and it's not a case of poor me or, it's just making people aware that there are realities, whether it's a bereavement, whether it's cancer, depression, or there are additional consequences, factors that people might not think about. And I want to try and get that across in some of these
definitely
insights.
I'm still clawing back from that, like 6 months of not working. And it adds the extra pressure on. And even though it's a year since Johnny's passed, they do say with suicide, especially because it's a shock, that the real grieving process starts after a year. And then I'm like, I can't have another year off work. So it's like, how long can you give yourself that grace, that compassion to be like, I'm just not going to work and have that time off? For most people, they can't. Because they've got to keep working. My dad's self-employed. He's got his own business. He's got a wife and 2 kids and a house. Luckily for him, he enjoys channeling. He enjoys being busy and channeling himself into it. And that, I think, it's helped him. But at the same time, I do sort of worry and think like, have you taken enough time for you? Because since Johnny passed, he's continued with his business.
And people grieve in different ways. And
I
think you mentioned this on the questionnaire and other people have, there's no kind of end point to getting over it. It's continuous, and there'll be waves and there'll be triggers and there'll be, almost just random times when things come front of mind. And you're aware that that's going to continue for a long time. And, over the last year or so, presumably you've had these
it's been a roller coaster.
And so for yourself and for your family, do you want to just mention what that's been like, dealing with the sort of the grief? And I guess it's not a case of accepting what's happened. It's more that has happened. I've got to get on with my own life And of course, I'm going to be thinking about it, and there's going to be ups and downs and different things. But
there's definitely been challenges with regards to not knowing what emotion's coming when. And for me, that's part of the reason I started so slowly going back into work, is that I was worried about what I was going to feel like from one day to the next. Because some days I could wake up and feel fine, and the next day I could wake up and I could feel really sad, really depressed, like break down, or I could feel really angry. And I feel like I actually did another podcast this time last year, and I must have been it must have been a month or 6 weeks into losing Johnny.
Wow.
And I watch it back now, and I'm like, how? I don't recognize the person sitting there. How did I sit there and talk about this happening so blasé? And it's like I'd gone into this emotional sort of shutdown, and I was talking about what happened to me as if it had happened to someone else.
Like a third person.
Yes,
kind of
I was able to
situation,
completely detach myself from it. And I think for the first 6 months, maybe to a year, depending on who you are and how much you address your emotions, that very much is the case. And then the levels of acceptance get harder and harder and harder. For example, Christmas was the first Christmas without Johnny, and Johnny loved Christmas. It was his favourite day. And that for me was awful. I actually chose to be on my own that day instead of with my family, because I knew that I needed to process some really heavy emotions. And I just needed to let it out if I needed to. And I didn't want that to upset the rest of my family if they didn't feel that way.
Okay.
And then after that straight away came a year since Johnny passed. And that was January the 17th, just gone. And my dad and brothers found that really difficult. I found that a breeze.
Okay.
And I was just like, it's just another day. Like, it's the day he exited this world. I don't have any good memories of him on this day. And for me, my grief doesn't get greater or lesser depending on what day it is. It's still there. It's still just as heavy on the 16th of January as it is on the 17th.
Yeah.
And that was just my logical way of protecting
that's
myself
interesting,
through that.
Yeah, I can imagine that birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas, perhaps they, for many people, are triggers, and it comes front of mind again.
Yeah.
And for other people, it could be any day.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's interesting, because with that, the people going through it, I think, will recognise that there is no end date. There is no distinguishing.
And there's no right or wrong. There's no you should be sad on his birthday.
Yeah. But externally, friends, family, acquaintances, I suspect, and tell me what your experience has been, is the expectation is it gets better over time.
Yeah.
And yes, you're going to be particularly upset on his birthday, or particularly upset at this time, but otherwise, you just get on with your life.
Yeah.
Again, trying to get across to people that it doesn't work like that. It's still only just over a year.
Yeah.
And
I'm still very much in the early stages.
But what's your view, or what's your experience of that?
From what I can say from my experiences so far, obviously I've got a very long journey to continue. For me, the 6 month mark was when reality started to double down. Okay. And it's like, no, he really isn't here. It wasn't just a crazy TV program that I watched, or BBC drama, it's happened, to him and to me and to our family.
There's no denying this anymore. It's real. It has happened, yeah.
And those levels of acceptance and reality just keep doubling down.
Okay.
And they'll just keep doubling you down and breaking you further down and pushing these emotions out of you until you feel like you've completely accepted them. And often you haven't. They'll still come back up again. But I can say now, the 1 year mark has passed. I do feel different. Okay. I feel more able to speak about things. But also more protective of my own energy. So in the first 3 or 4 months, I could speak about Johnny all the time. I was just chatting about him all the time and like looking at photos or whatever. Now I'm much more sensitive. I'm at peace with it more within myself, but things set me off a lot easier. So I will avoid looking at photos of him, and I'll avoid thinking about him too much. I'll keep myself really busy with work and stuff like that, and channeling my energy into other things. And I don't know if the early stages of grief, you're forced into it. There's no other way to deal with what you're dealing with than to be completely authentic and feel everything.
Yeah, and I think a lot does depend on the factors.
Yeah.
I mean, if I know you've got a grandparent who's like 97 years of age and they die, it's like, well, you can't be too upset in the sense that you
knew it was coming.
Yeah, you knew it was coming. They've had a full life, etc.
Yeah.
If it's a situation like your brother, that's completely different.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be differences.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's completely normal, but there's an element of, and I've not had anyone close to me, like really close to me, pass away. But speaking to some other people, and just the way I would imagine it to be, is almost, there's a point for most of the time, especially now, I suspect there's the emotions of anger and why has this happened, and sadness, and almost just how bad it is and how tragic it is. They're the overriding thoughts and emotions when you think about it, as opposed to being able to, when you do think about him, smile and laugh and think of the good times and think about what happened when you were kids and that side of it. And that,
that's really interesting you say that, because when I've been trying to explain this to my partner, and people say, oh, think of the happy memories. And I'm like, at the moment, there aren't happy memories, because all the happy memories are sad, because they're grieving memories. So I've either got the choice of thinking about the tragic, sad memories of the day he took his own life, going and seeing him in a coffin, the funeral. They're the tragic, the difficult, him being really ill. They're the difficult memories. And then all the happy memories, they're almost just as sad, if not more sad, because they're the grieving memories. They're the memories of like, oh, I wish we still had that. They're the bits you're really missing, and you're not missing the tragic parts. I don't want them to happen again, but the bits that were good. So you don't really have much choice as to many thoughts to pick from that are positive. And I feel like that's what makes sudden grief so difficult, is that there's just not much left positive to think about until you go through the negative thought processes. And there's certain thoughts and memories I have with my brother that I feel like I've processed. So for example, Christmas, I spent a lot of time thinking about our Christmas days together, and there's you always have that one memory that repeats and cycles through. And when I first remembered that memory, wow, that was hard. It ripped through me, and I got really sad, and I'm like, oh, I'm really missing him. The more I thought about it, and the more I released that emotion, now I can think about that memory quite at peace.
Okay.
So I think for every...
Well, I think also there's the balance of spending time thinking about it so that you can process it. You can manage that emotion and then try not to think about it. It's like bottling it up, not thinking about it, and then at some point it's going to come out. So you're trying to get that balance.
And it's getting the balance of allowing yourself to go there, to go into that state of real emotion, like real movie moment. Like for me, it was like sitting on the floor of the shower wailing, and I even had flittering thoughts in my mind saying like, why are you being so dramatic? Like, oh, like, gosh, this is like a film. Like, is this real? but actually they were my pure, real emotions coming out. And I don't know if a lot of people really let themselves go there for the fear of not being able to get themselves back. And that was me. Unless I had somebody around that I felt I could lean on for support, really going to that space on your own of allowing yourself to let that emotion come out, because it's so heavy and it's so difficult and it's so painful.
Yeah.
That what if you just get stuck there and you never feel better again?
Okay.
So for me, it was being able to be able to trust myself, to be able to enter that space of looking at photos and videos of Johnny and having a cry and being sad, and then being able to self-soothe and go, oh no, okay, it's just a memory. Like, it's fine. Your actual physical reality right now is okay.
And it's, I mean, again, this is generalizing and not going into the real depths of some of the emotions you've gone through and will go through. But when people do cry, they always feel better afterwards.
Oh yeah. You feel so relaxed and just spaced out. Like,
yeah, it's
and you're exhausted and you sleep like a baby.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of times in my life at different times when, I've cried and you feel better afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, there's certain times when you shouldn't cry, or you don't want to, or, and you can't be just crying all the time. But when it is justified and makes sense, or when it just naturally comes, then you've got to, go with it.
Yeah.
And again, it's a generalisation, but men are rubbish at crying.
Yeah.
And that's slowly changing, and more men admit to crying and stuff. But that whole attitude of I don't cry and all, and people are different, but if it makes sense, if it's justified, if it's a real emotion that you want to, then just let it go. Let it go. You will feel better afterwards.
100%. And I really rate my dad, because he is, in one sense, one of the strongest men I know, that he will cry on the bus to a stranger. And he'll get upset and he'll talk about things. He calls them his 5-minute friends. And he's a very chatty guy. He'll generally chat to anyone, and he'll get talking, and he'll often talk about Johnny, and he'll have a cry, and then he'll just proceed with his day. And I'm like, wow, you don't get many men that will just happily go around doing that. And often I think for me it's out of consideration for other people that I don't want to cry, because I worry that I'm making other people feel uncomfortable. And that's not a them problem or a me problem, it's a combined problem, because I'm worried about upsetting other people with my sadness. So I'll feel less comfortable crying in public or around people than I do on my own. But actually we all need that support when we're sad. Of like me in the airport, for example, really crying, would have just been nice if somebody would have come up and said, are you okay? And at that moment I couldn't think about anyone else.
And I guess if you did loads of experiments of situations like that, more often than not, it'd be the same reaction. Only occasionally would people go and do what you would consider the right thing to do. And that is obviously a shame, but you can't control what other people might do. So in terms of your own mental health, support, how you're dealing with things, how you're going to keep dealing with things going forward, have you sought like professional help, or how do you keep yourself going?
So I, straight after Johnny passed, I went for private a few sessions of private therapy. And I got...
And was that specifically bereavement counselling, or was it
It was, yeah. Okay. It was specific. It wasn't a bereavement counsellor, but that was the main topic of conversation. And I got diagnosed. I don't like the word diagnosed, but it was suggested that I was suffering with grief-related PTSD due to the shock of what had happened. And that meant that I had an elevated heart rate. I had the fear of like time running out. I always felt like something bad was going to happen. Panic attacks. Just general very heightened anxiety, and I wasn't aware of like how common it was, and I thought that I didn't really, because it was just there in the background happening all the time. And it also caused me to have really vivid sleep paralysis. So every time I would like fall asleep, I'd feel like I was trying to throw myself out of the dream, and I was having this really weird awake asleep kind of bad dreams about Johnny, for example, different things. And it's subsided now, but even a year on, I definitely still have this level of anxiety that something bad's going to happen, that I'm going to be late. That doesn't allow me to focus so well. It's like a little bit like what people, from what I understand, ADHD is like, where you have lots of tabs open in your brain and it's difficult to focus on one thing. So for me, I think my body's been trying to protect itself because I'm just expectant of something sudden and shocking to be happening all the time. So I'm stuck in fight or flight. I'm on edge. And that is something I don't think people register as a symptom of grief. Especially, I guess especially like a sudden grief.
That sounds like elevated levels of stress, anxiety. They call cortisol.
High cortisol levels, adrenaline,
and that isn't good for you.
No,
you know that's there for a reason, for specific things, not continually.
So at the moment I'm experiencing it chronically rather than acutely.
So what are you doing about that?
So for me, like, I went straight into, I've always been a nature girl. I went straight into spending as much time as I could in nature. Me and my boyfriend live in our camper van. So we spent a lot of time out in the Peak District and the Lake District, just walking. I found walking really, really helpful. I'm sure you're a big advocate.
Absolutely.
Lots of walking, lots of outdoor time. I got really into foraging because that sort of looking at something in detail and experiencing awe really drops me down into parasympathetic sort of rest and digest. And creating, just really having safe spaces. So I spent in the first 6 months, well, especially in the first couple of months, I didn't really see anyone other than my very close friends and family. And they were my safe people. Now, obviously, I'm out back in the world. But I still, if I listen to my body much more, and if I don't fancy going out socializing, or if a situation is going to make me feel stressed, then I'm much better at having boundaries and saying no. Because I have to protect my energy and make sure that I don't go into overdrive. Also, reducing screen time has helped me massively. Just a little thing like that. And I've always been a massive advocate of yoga and Pilates, the breathing techniques, meditating, all the holistic side of stuff. I'm a massive advocate for, and does really help me.
But I think the good thing, there's so many benefits. What you talked about, being active, nature, outdoors, the yoga, Pilates, all of that stuff. Big advocate of, and huge range of different benefits. But particularly with the anxiety and the stress, they have to be the best things. And the good thing about them is you see results straight away. There's none of this waiting and waiting. So, I mean, I think they are, for anybody in a similar situation, really, really encourage people to do those things.
And like the biggest piece of advice for me would to just be get outdoors. Like back to basics, get outdoors. Eat clean. Get outside, and get fresh air, sunshine.
Declutter the mind, or all of that stuff.
I did have to, with my exercise, I had to reduce my level of exercise because my cortisol levels were so high. I used to run and do HIIT and stuff like that. And because my cortisol levels were so high, anything that increased my cortisol levels was actually also preventing me from sleeping and giving me more sleep paralysis. I could really, because I was dealing with the anxiety day to day, I could really measure how well or how bad I was doing based on how well I was sleeping. And I noticed when I did more physical exercise in terms of running and HIIT in the day, my sleep would be really bad because my cortisol levels had shot right up, and I was double loading up on cortisol, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas when I did yoga and walked, I slept much better.
Okay.
So yeah, big advocates of slowing down.
Yeah, being kind to yourself, doing the things that are going to help you. And I mean, clearly what's happened, tragic, you wouldn't wish upon anybody. It's still early days in the sense it's only just over a year since it's happened. Plus you had the 6 or 7 years of, dealing with the situation before you passed away. And from what you said, it sounds like, you know what is going to work.
Yeah.
What's good for you, what you need to do, but it's going to take not going to take a long time. It's going to be there continuously.
Yeah. Yes.
And recognizing that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that anyone watching this has found it very interesting, but also beneficial, because you never know when someone else is, you're going to go through something similar.
Yeah.
Or a best friend or a family member, and understanding more about the situation, getting those insights from people who've been there.
Yeah.
So I just want to say massive thank you. Of course, this has been emotional and difficult at times, but yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot. I'm sure there's loads of stuff there which people are going to benefit from. So I just want to say a massive thank you. And yeah, all the best with the business, everything else you're doing.
Thank you.
And yeah, definitely keep in touch.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really cool what you're doing. It's something I've been wanting to do since Johnny passed, is share my story, because I'm a big believer in it's not what happens to you, but it's how you respond to what happens to you. And we can use these traumas, of which everybody will experience at some point in their lives, and we can use them and learn from them, or we can let them eat us up. And it's hard. It's really hard to dig really, really deep and just be like, okay, how has this situation served me, and what positive can I bring to the world from what's happened to me?
Yeah.
So it's super cool and inspiring what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And I'll obviously encourage anyone to fill out a questionnaire online, whether it's the bereavement topic or any of the other topics. Get in touch. If you're interested in becoming a guest like Ruby on the podcast, get in touch, tell people, and also look at the results and insights on the Lived Insights website, because there's loads of information. You instantly see the results that people have inputted in. A lot of really useful information there. So once again, thank you so much.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.